Okay.
Hey everyone, welcome to our Digital Learning Day 2019 session on digital learning trends landing right now. My name's Phill Bevan. I'm a community advisor here at VETR. I'm stoked to be joining you, particularly with our special guest today, Mr. Graham Glass, coming live from rainy San Fran, as we were just talking about, to talk to us about what's going on in the area of digital learning, and particularly in the next sort of 12 or 24 months, what are some of the trends that we're seeing. Thanks so much for making the time to speak with us today, Graham. It's fantastic. Now, I don't want to spend too much time introducing you. I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself, but let me just say, an educator, and I love how you start with that, an educator, an author, a serial entrepreneur. Can you give us a bit more flesh on those bones and talk to us about your background and your current operations?
Yeah, I'd love to. So a little bit about, just my general background. So I was very lucky. I went to one of the top schools in the UK when I was a kid. And I always loved being at school. I know that not everyone has that experience, but I absolutely loved it. And I remember thinking, one of these days being a teacher might actually be, a really great fun thing. But then when I started finding out how much teachers got paid, I thought maybe that's not the best idea. So I had it in the back of my mind. But I'm a computer science guy. I started programming in a calculator when I was, 8 years old. So I came to America to do my graduate studies in computer science. And while I was there, and I had almost no money, I got approached by the university who said, Graham, would you like to teach computer science here? Which I wasn't expecting, because literally I have no teaching credentials, no teaching experience. I didn't really know why they asked me, but I said, yeah, I'd love to. And so when I gave my first lecture, I literally had an envelope with 3 lines. Those are my entire notes. Totally winged it, and it went fantastically well. So since then, I just thought, this is the life. Being an educator is so enjoyable. But I am, as you mentioned, an entrepreneur. I like to build companies. So my first company was actually a training company. And so we were teaching computer science, technology, and architecture and programming all over the US. And I saved up a good amount in my bank account. And then finally, I decided I'm going to form my first software business. So we went strength to strength. So as you know, we're right now right in the heart of e-learning and education and cutting edge technology. So that's kind of the reason why I'm doing what I'm doing.
Fantastic. And in terms of your current operations, CYPHER Learning, I wanted to congratulate you. I haven't spoken to you recently. I know that your organisation wins awards on a regular basis, so it's probably not a big thing anymore, but I wanted to let everyone know and congratulate you personally and your team. Neo LMS has just been named the #1 LMS in the world for higher education by Craig Weiss Group, who we're huge fans of eLearning 24/7 and Craig Weiss at this end. And that is an absolutely astonishing achievement. They apparently track more than 1,300 LMSs globally. You wouldn't, every man and his dog's got one in their backyard, apparently.
Everyone's got an LMS.
Yeah, so people keep saying to me for years now, not that we're talking about LMS trends today, but people have been saying for years that the LMS is dead, LMS is dead, and yet there just seems to be more and more of them.
It's a $20 billion global market. It's not going anywhere soon.
Yeah, and as we say, there's cars and cars, there's LMSs and LMSs. So perhaps you're driving the Maserati or the Bentley of the crew at the moment. So congratulations. Now,
thanks,
before I jump too far into the questions and talk about these trends, I did just want to cover off a little bit of housekeeping so I can see that the chat's going flat out already. So guys, it's great to see you on the chat. I'm tracking some of it here, and we'll try and address bits and pieces as they come up. If you do, though, have an absolute burning question that you want to make sure we get to, we do have an ask a question area just at the bottom of the screen. Just pop it in there, and we'll come back at the end if we've got. I'm sure we'll have time and for a question for Graham, and we'll come back to those. The other item I wanted to mention as well is that we do have a couple of polls running. So there is a polls area in the bottom of the screen as well, and there's 2 polls two questions we're asking you about today. The first one is, hey Deborah, how you going? Anyway, the first one is, what is the key challenge in supporting adaptive and personalised learning experiences in your courses? What's the key challenge? We've got some options there. And then the second one is, does your organisation already offer mobile, digital, micro-learning options? Now, we've packed a heap of jargon into both of those questions. So over the next 40 minutes, we'll draw on Graham's expertise to explain some of those terms of what it means in current 2019 language, and then maybe come back to those polls and questions at the end of the session and sort of see what you guys are saying as well. So I mentioned the first question there, Graham, adaptive personalised learning. I'm hearing this everywhere, and it'd be great if you could start off maybe with an explanation for those of us who aren't familiar with what adaptive learning personalisation is, and more importantly then, how do you see this area progressing in the next 12 months or so?
Yeah, I'd love to. I will mention one of the things that we do have a benefit of is seeing the trends in schools and universities and businesses, because our product suite covers all those areas. So we've got a pretty good idea of what's a trend in all areas versus just one. But there does seem to be a big trend in general towards a learner-centric education process. And learner-centric is kind of even more important than maybe adaptive learning or personalized learning. And what it means is that the system is helping you to learn, what you need, when you need it, in a way that makes sense to you, as opposed to a typical education environment where maybe at school, everyone of a certain age goes through the same course, the same stuff at the same time, which, as most of us know, is not really the best thing. Or in businesses, if you want someone to learn something, rather than saying, hey, right before you need it, click this button and you can learn it, it's more like you're all going to sit in this course room for 2 days and take this subject and click through. And so, and it's not just me who's saying this is all over the place. And there was a very interesting report from the Harvard Publishing Review, very well-known company, and that they get inputs from a lot of different areas as well. The number one trend, according to them, is learner-centric. So that's the kind of the main thing. And this also sort of combines with what you might say about millennials, and I know this is kind of a much overused phrase, but if you look at the technology that a relatively young person uses, it is pretty personalized already. Like when you go to Twitter, I don't see every single Twitter feed in the world. Twitter automatically knows what my interests are. It gives me this kind of information. When I go to YouTube, I'm a huge tennis fan. It's like videos of Roger Federer is everywhere. It's not just generic. So I'm used to the idea that learning is fun, it's personalized. I get to see what I see. And so that generation, which is used to that in other spheres of life, naturally expects to see that when they are learning something, whether it's corporate or school. And as far as adaptive learning goes, adaptive learning is an approach to provide personalized learning. And adaptive learning basically means that the system is learning a little bit about you, and based on what it learns about you, starts either making recommendations or tailoring the content to you. So for example, let's just say that I was teaching computer science, which of course I used to. I might have a computer science course, maybe it's online, and maybe I'm making money on the side, selling these courses. But there are going to be some people who are really, really good at this stuff. And very early on in the course, they show a lot of mastery of a bunch of skills. And it's going to be quite boring to them if they have to plow through a lot of remedial material. Similarly, if you've got someone who's not very good, they might get totally left behind. So you can have a system where, based on measurements and quizzes and other data points, will automatically show advanced modules if you show advanced, will automatically show remedial modules if you're falling behind. And essentially, that single underlying course, you're getting different views on it based on what the system is learning about you. So that's like a little bit of what adaptive learning is, and as it pertains to providing a personalized learning experience.
Oh, that's been absolutely fantastic. And you remind me again, Graham, I'm also, for those, I know some of our community know this, I'm also originally an educator and primary school trained, grade 4, taught grade 4, we're talking about 25 years ago. And we'd always be talking about, how we're tailoring programs and making sure that we're doing pre-assessments and achieving, finding out the right levels, whether it be reading, arithmetic, etc., and pitching the content for individuals. But what you've just described is exactly that process, but being enabled with technology that we're able to perhaps see and do it much more easily.
Yeah, one interesting thing when you talk about some of the high school, some of the older systems were ones where you could actually personalize your course as a teacher, but it was all manual. So you would have to go to an assignment and say, well, this assignment is for Joe and Sally and not Bill. So you actually would have to put in a lot of work. And if you have just 10 people in your course, maybe that's okay. But when I was teaching at college, I would have like 150 people in my unit. So there's no way you can do that. But more modern platforms, you can set up rules and you can say, based on their progress or based on their mastery of this learning concept or based on these quiz scores, hide this, show this, hide this, show this. So the nice thing is that it's not like the platform is doing everything, but it's allowing you, the educator, to take what you learn, automate it so that you can focus on, inspiring your students.
I think that's a really important point. And when you start talking about corporate learning and L&D, that hundreds might become thousands in terms of the implementation of those particular learning experiences. I wanted to move on to the area of video, which is another trend that's been a trend for a number of years now and just continues to grow and grow and grow. I understand this year, just a random stat for people, that I was reading an article last week that this year, 2019, the amount of video viewed over the internet will surpass the amount of video people watch on free-to-air TV globally. So again, we're sort of reaching another tipping point where the Internet of Things is taking over everything. Where do you see this whole area of video going, Graham, in terms of perhaps just the next couple of years? How we know it's important, but why is it important, and where do you see it heading?
Yeah, I mean, I think, so I'll use a personal anecdote. Unfortunately, my dog recently was quite ill. And so I had to figure out how to give my dog this subcutaneous drip at home, which is basically where you have a needle and you have to put it in the scruff of the neck of the dog and give it, water. That's not the kind of thing that I want to screw up, So what did I do? I didn't find some e-learning 20-hour course on being a vet. I just go to YouTube and type in subcutaneous drip dog and, here's a good video, and I watch it, and then boom. And I actually did quite a good job in the end. So, just from personal experience, if I want to learn a quick thing fast, I just go to YouTube, find the video and do it. And there's plenty of anecdotes. I mean, there's been some young girls in some of these talent shows where they learn how ballet just from watching YouTube videos. So it's incredible. So now put yourself into a corporate environment, and let's just say you're about to conduct your first interview. So you just got promoted to manager, you're going to do your first interview, and you realize, oops, I don't really have a lot of experience. What would you do? So ideally what you'd have is in your platform a way to search for, how to interview. And you might get this 5-hour e-learning course and a few others. And one might be a 2-minute video, 5-star rating on just how to do that one thing. Which one do you think you're going to do? You're just going to click on that little video. And by microlearning, usually microlearning means a very small bite-sized chunk of learning material. Typically a video, could be a PDF or something. There's not quizzes, there's no discussion groups, there's no, interactive sessions, which is kind of more like a full-blown course. It's very, very restricted, very simple, and it's like, bite, I've got it, move on. And so there's definitely a trend towards using microlearning for those kind of just-in-time convenience learnings. But those same modules are usually also repurposed as part of a curated, larger learning experience. So I think one of the trends we're going to see is these big blocks of sometimes quite pretty high quality content being divided into lots of smaller modules, being made available as micro-learning chunks when it makes sense, but also as part of a curated experience if you want like the full 1 to 2 hour training course.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that. Two things that I wanted to draw out there. The first one is the reviews, because as you were saying, YouTube, I mean, teenagers don't talk to parents anymore, trust me. They just seem to Google or their search on YouTube and off they go. But the reviews, the ratings, the number of watches, that authoritative nature of the content is actually coming from the users themselves, confirming that this is the best one to watch, or it's the most watched, etc. So that, I think that review component is really important, and bringing that back into a more structured environment. I suppose if those grabs are available within a corporate environment or within a school environment, someone still has to curate them. So whether that's the role of educators, obviously in the first instance, but maybe there's some kind of user involvement in curating and reviewing that as well.
One of the options we're actually releasing in Q2 is a browser plugin. So if you're in a corporate environment and you see something on the web that you think this would be really good for, management training, then literally you might be looking at the YouTube video, click the browser thing, say this would be good for this, submit. And then you would have one or more curators who can approve it, because obviously you want to have some kind of filtering. And then once it's been approved, then people can rate it. And when next time you search for things that are really good for management training, you can start having this funnel of all these really cool things that people find on the web. So you want to make it really easy for people in your environment to tag stuff. As you mentioned, you do want some people to be able to create it, and then you want people to inside your organization to be able to rate it.
Fantastic. And you mentioned, I suppose, the move from microlearning being, and it's interesting, we sort of went from video into microlearning. There's a little bit of mobile in there as well, because a lot of this stuff is sort of being played. It's a 2-minute grab on your phone on the spot or on the train or wherever you might be for that information. How is your dog, by the way? Everything's okay? He's recovered?
Better, thank you.
Good news. Well, you definitely did do the job then correctly by the sounds of that. But you mentioned that in terms of the that longer course where we start getting into the 1-2 hours or beyond, the area of gamification keeps coming up as one of the ways to sort of encourage, entertain, engage, and keep that momentum going on that longer time period for the course. Where do you see that whole gamification, again, is another area that's been around for a few years. Where do you see that trend going in the next 12 months? Yeah,
I tell you what, gamification surprised me. So, because we've had gamification for a long time. And in the early days, people would say, well, we keep on hearing about gamification. We need to add this to our product. And I'm saying, like, yeah, that makes pretty good sense. I can definitely see school kids loving this. I thought adults, universities, like, they're just not going to bother. But I can see kids really getting into it because they like all these Candy Crush games and you get 20 points. So what we did is we added it using automation. So you can use almost anything that happens in the system to trigger you getting points. And as your points go up, you get to levels. And as you level up, you can get more rewards. The interesting thing is that the number one use of gamification is corporations, followed by university students, followed by kids. So totally the opposite than what I thought. And once again, I don't know whether it's because of a millennial style thing or whether corporate environments are a bit more sophisticated about, engaging users, but it's incredibly popular. It wasn't intuitive at all to me. But here is one of the trends that we're seeing. So first of all, people do get into this stuff in an unusual way. I mean, they are really, really driven by it. So for example, I was at an event last week and we had one of our customer testimonials who was a professor in the Philippines who is crazy about gamification in a good way. So he actually gave this demo of how it all worked, and it was really sophisticated. He had custom graphics, he had animations of stuff. He had like 12 different kinds of levels, all with their own special meanings. And it would be, you first enroll in the course, you get X number of points. You get over this certain quiz score, you get this number of points. If you turn something in early, you get this number of points. But what he started doing that was very unusual is he allowed the games and the levels to be used almost like get out of jail free cards, which is, well, if you get to this third level, you can actually hand in an assignment late without a penalty. And if you get to this level, you can skip one of any assignment you want. I thought that is so brilliant. Like, if that happened to me at college, I'd be hugely into it because you want to race ahead and get these additional ways to help you. The other thing that's quite interesting is that for our customers who sell courses, one of the very nice things is you can have a rule which says if you achieve level 5, then automatically give that user a 90% discount coupon for any one of your other courses, or give them a discount coupon for a free PDF download or something like that. So people have figured out now you can use gamification to award and incent your own customers to buy more, which I thought was really cool. I also do want to mention that there are a lot of talks about gamification. There are some products that literally gamification is at the end of the course, you get a badge. That's it. And so I don't find that level of gamification that interesting, but I do think automation-based gamification with games and levels and triggers and actions, then it's like you can really use your imagination just like that guy did in the Philippines.
There's so many great examples in there, and I think you've nailed on a really key point that I was going to make as well. That quite often when we're talking about in the work with educators in the Australian context, we still see gamification fairly much at the early adopter stage. There's not huge amounts of adoption at this stage, and part of that I think is the technology perhaps in the past hasn't been able to easily enable it. And another part of it is just the lack of awareness, I suppose, of the various strategies and also how to implement in an effective way. But the reason I mention that is when we're talking with educators at that early stage, that's exactly what they come back with. Our student cohort aren't interested in badges, or we're not really wanting people to get points. We think that there's some kind of concern around a point structure. But having said that, when you look at the broader opportunities with modern environments with gamification, it's not one method or another method. It's actually a mix of the right gamification approaches that are going to work for each particular target group, whether you're in a corporate environment or a higher education sector, as you said.
And I would also mention two things when you have those kind of conversations. First thing is I would ask them, is that based on empirical evidence or just what you think is going to happen? Because I thought no one was going to use it, and I was completely wrong. The second thing, as far as points go, like in our particular system, you can have team games. So you can say this group of people might be, the Brisbane sales force versus the Perth sales force, and they're going through the same learning path together, and they're getting points. And you don't even have to say, oh, well, Bill has more than Ted. It's like, oh, the Brisbane team is beating the Perth team, and maybe there are some people who get offended by it, but honestly, most people actually have a blast doing this kind of stuff. It's just like clean fun.
Oh, I totally agree, and I love that concept of the team approach as well. Again, I think you've nailed the item. We do hear that a little bit, that we don't want everyone's learning and we're all collaborative and we're working together, and we don't feel that people should be competing against each other. But as you said, there's lots of ways that you can still do that without it being individualized. And also, there's lots of other automation ways that you can look at that gamification. Another one that I saw just recently, similar to what you were saying about when an individual reached a certain level, there was extra content released to them.
Yeah.
And that extra content is, it's
dynamic personalization. So like you say, you can say, when you get to level 5, unlock for that person this advanced content, or just it's like a fun online game that they take, just as a little prize.
Well, we're all fans of Easter egg hunts. There's no doubt about that, and it really just draws on that original, back to the 1980s Easter eggs hidden in the earliest computer games. So I think that this area has a long way to run. It's great to hear you seeing that the people's initial perceptions around gamification are being challenged as we actually implement different approaches and seeing some of those things being really successful.
Cool examples, it's a total eye-opener.
Yeah. The other one, and I think I'm seeing a lot of these trends sort of connected in terms of the way that they're being implemented in various environments. But the other one I wanted to ask you about was competency-based learning. In the Australian context, in our vocational system, we've had competency-based training for about 25 years. But this whole area of competency-based learning seems to be gathering quite significant significant steam and speed, I suppose, on a global basis. So can you sort of give us a view from that global perspective? What's going on with this area of competency-based learning and what it means?
Yeah, and honestly, I think this is actually the most important trend out of anything. And before I tell you why, I'm actually quite aware of the Australian vocational system, because I know that a few years ago I was looking at the competency map for, I think it was Australian water management, and there was like 2,000 competencies arranged in a hierarchy. It was pretty awe-inspiring, but I loved it. I mean, it made total sense. So I'll tell you a little story, and then I'll tell you why I think it's a big trend. So because I've been in education for a long time, I always love hearing about what's going on in different countries. And there's this fantastic system in Sweden called Knowledge Schools. It's a private school system, but it's one of the fastest growing school systems in Sweden. And here's the way it works. So what they did was they took all the things that you are meant to learn between the age of, say, 6 and 18 and created this huge competency graph of it all, whether it's math, physics, biology, French, etc. And they created all these modules that are all available online, all linked to those competencies.
Oh,
then
wow.
when you join the school, you get a personal mentor, and the mentor kind of interviews you, finds out your strengths and weaknesses, what you're interested in. And then they say, well, based on what you've said, why don't we just spend the first 2 weeks just delving into physics? That's it. And you can just go as fast as you like through physics. We don't care where you study. You can actually literally go home for 2 weeks and study on YouTube. We literally don't care. Or you can come to school, or you can work with your cohorts. And if you get stuck, you can schedule a private session or a group session with a physics teacher. So what you could do is you could go home, you could read a book, but when you want to show that you've mastered the material, they have a proctored system where you sit down, you take a whole bunch of tests, and you can imagine it's like in physics, check, check, check. Or if you've used Khan Academy math, it's the same thing. They have this little grid of cells, and as you show mastery in all the Khan Academy math, there's a little check on the cell. So basically the school is tracking your personalized knowledge of all of these competencies. And but you might get bored of physics after a week, and now I want to do a little bit of math, a little bit of science, a little bit of chemistry. So you can go under your own pace. Everything is being tracked, and they do not care how you learn something. All they care is that you end up learning it, which to me has always made so much sense. But it's a relatively rare way to think, even these days. So you could have someone who's a physics genius, and within one semester they've mastered the whole of physics, and they don't have to do any more physics if they don't want it. So fast forward, and people are beginning to realize that if you actually want personalized education, whether it's for kids or for students or for adults, then the system which is going to be personalizing your education has got to know your strengths and weaknesses. Otherwise, how could it personalize? And the best way to track your strengths and weaknesses is to track your demonstrated mastery of these various different competencies. And these might be graded by self-assessment, by a proctored exam, might be through a 360 employee degree, your professor going, this guy really, really knows it because I had a really compelling interview on the elevator with him. So I think the competency-based learning is the key thing to opening the floodgates to personalized learning. And I think that more and more people are beginning to realize this.
Oh, look, I agree completely. And part of what you're reminding me of in that fantastic example with the school is that part of it has got nothing to do with, part of this approach has got nothing to do with technology. It's about thinking about how we're going to do things differently within educating people into the future. You've reminded me in one of our local universities here in Australia, they are piloting a process of block training for subjects. So, general university study, you'll go and you'll do a semester of university and you'll be studying multiple subjects. With this particular university, they've been piloting a situation where you just study one subject at a time, exactly as you just described. And you've got a 4-week block for that subject, and then you finish that subject, and then you move on to the next 4-week block. And then
exactly. Why should it make any difference? Or there are some kids who are incredibly focused and they can literally do 10 hours straight in physics. Why not?
Yeah, and in the initial research findings, that's only been running they're in their second year now, but in the initial findings, they're actually showing greater student engagement, greater student retention, greater pass rates, lower attrition. There's a whole range of benefits, albeit on a very small study so far.
Yeah. I know when I went to high school, they call them periods were 40 minutes. So you might get really into something and there's like, bing, stop doing your physics, now you're doing French. It's like, what? Right when I was getting into it. So, and here's another thing that if you go to competency-based learning, it opens things up. And this is not quite so obvious. So I was watching a video. This happened to be a school in Minnesota, I think, but they embrace project-based learning. And the general idea is find a project that you enjoy, and you're going to do this project for, say, a month. And they map the projects against the competencies that you're meant to learn. So in one semester, maybe you're meant to learn a little bit of science, a little bit of history, and, I don't know, Greek, Egyptian mythology or something. So one kid might go, well, I'm going to learn, and this is a real example, how to mummify a chicken. So it's kind of like a little bit of science, but a little bit of background from Egyptology, a little bit of history, and maybe a little bit of biology. So they would study this thing, they would work with teachers, then at the end of the semester, they would give a presentation, and here would be a chicken as a mummy. But because everything was tied back to competencies, the teacher at that point could fill in that individual's competency map, like they know this, they know this, they know this. So that one project checks off a whole bunch of cross-disciplinary things, whereas if you think about the way that people are taught these days, you do math, and then you do science, and then you do history. It's really, really hard to track what would be going on if people were doing all these things at the same time. And I think that's probably one of the reasons there's going to be a lot of resistance to this thing, because the way that schools are organized and the way that adults who run those schools are organized is very topic centric. So it's going to be much, much harder to be a history teacher if you're actually also teaching a little bit of science, a little bit of chemistry or something. So it's going to take a while for this thing to kind of get adopted by these kinds of systems.
Oh, look, I agree completely. But and bringing it into a corporate L&D space, you mentioned before the millennials. We know that in the coming decade, the millennials will now make up the largest component of the workforce. So while some of us who've been around for a little while might feel a little bit uncomfortable about some of these new directions or how we're going to implement some of these amended approaches, there's certainly an expectation that we will follow evidence-based practice, as you mentioned before, where we know that things are working, and we've got this huge wave of people coming through that where this is just normal. It's a native approach for them, and they expect it.
I'll give you a really good example of this in corporate L&D. So think about, you have a job title. Let's just say you are a junior digital marketer. Now, theoretically, for that title, in your database and through your platform, you could say, this job title has the following 15 competencies that they should know. And so when you log on, it'll say, hey, you're a digital marketing manager. Do you want to verify your competencies so far? And you go, yes. And maybe it's through reviews or self-assessment or something else. And now check, 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 check. I've got all these competencies for being what I am right now. But then a lot of millennials, well, not just millennials, but a lot of people want to advance in their careers. Like, I actually want to be a senior marketing manager. Okay, pick that from the database, set that as one of my goals. Now at this point, you can do a gap analysis and say, well, to go from where you are now to where you want to go, here are the 7 competencies that you need to be able to show mastery of. Do you want to get going now? Yes. Okay, for this competency, here are the top 5 resources. It could be YouTube videos, courses, people to talk with. So now it's kind of helping you, like, for you to go to this career based on competency maps and a gap analysis. Here are all the ways that we can get there. And as you move in that direction, we'll be able to assess you as you go. And a lot of companies, they're highly incented to keep people moving up their career and track their learning experience, because otherwise they're going to lose a lot of those people.
Exactly. And when we think about the skills challenge that's coming at us across the globe, and certainly across all Western countries, as we shift with the ongoing digital disruption and the emerging technologies on the radar, we know that we've got to learn more things faster. So being able to identify what those are and being able to achieve them in various flexible ways, I think is just going to become more and more and more important. It's a great example. You've reminded me an alignment to a skills matrix. I think that's probably easier in a single corporation than it is in developing the entire school curriculum in competency format. It would be quite a task. But having said that, we do have a lot of that in place already in the Australian region. So maybe it's something that we should be looking at sharing with the rest of the world. Now, I can see a couple of chats coming in here, and we are coming up close to time. So I've got some questions here for you as well, Graham. I'll just bring those up now and have a look. Good question, Deborah. So the company, firstly, give a bit of a shout out to Graham. CYPHER Learning, there's a green button at the bottom of the screen. So hit CYPHER Learning, and the three solutions that you were mentioning, thank you very much for asking, is Neo LMS, focus on schools and universities, Matrix LMS for corporates, vocational, and then Indie LMS for entrepreneurs, solo educators, so much of a growing area in that space as well. So go away, we'll give you a shout out, have a look at the tech when you get a chance, and you'll see a lot of those items in practice, I suggest. Just a question here from Debbie, which is an interesting one. Are we heading towards a younger generation losing their writing skills due to digital learning? What are your thoughts on that, Graham?
That's a good question. I would say I don't think they're going to lose their writing skills. I think their handwriting is going to get a lot messier because, you know, most times you write an essay these days, it's through a keyboard. It doesn't have to look that legible. And quite honestly, it's not just the younger generation. It's like when I was a kid, I used to write beautifully, and now it's like a complete mess because I don't care. It only has to communicate with me and nobody else. I think as far as writing skills at a grammatic level, I would certainly hope that they shouldn't lose them. I mean, you still have to communicate with other human beings. You know, you still have to do a nice job. And, you know, I would say that, you know, when I'm hiring people, I definitely want people to be able to write properly. Otherwise, it doesn't make a very good impression to customers. But I think definitely handwriting skills are going to go way down. Yeah,
absolutely. I totally agree. And my mum always used to say I had the handwriting of a doctor, and that's pretty much it. But I've got three teenagers here, and we don't have too many pens in the house, I've got to say. It is very much a digital approach, but that doesn't mean, as you said, to say that the structure and formation of writing and creative writing and writing for various purposes is not super important. It's just maybe being done in a slightly different way. Another one here, I was just looking at the polls. So our first question, what is the key challenge? And thanks everyone for voting as we've been talking through the session. If you haven't voted yet, still jump into those polls and have a go. The first question is really interesting for me. I'm not sure if you'll agree with this, Graham. What is the key challenge in supporting adaptive and personalised learning experiences in your courses? The number one key challenge as voted by our audience today is technology, that we don't have the technology we need for that challenge. So that is interesting.
Our system. No, I mean, I say that, but it is somewhat true. I mean, as you can tell, the things that we've been talking about are things I'm passionate about. So we've dedicated the entire company to make this stuff really easy. So I mean, you're right, though. I mean, a lot of platforms, I don't want to get nasty, a lot of platforms out there do not make this stuff easy at all. But we've made it super easy. So I don't think it's very, at this point in time, at least if you find the right product, it's not really, I don't think it's really the technology from my perspective. It's more like opening your mind to how it can be used, because, you know, I mean, I used to teach at college. I'm so used to things being linear, sequential, fairly static, fairly boring. And it really, you know, you have to create one or two courses and say, wow, you can actually make it so adaptive, dynamic, and it's really very easy. Then you start going crazy. It's like gamification. You know, you think it's going to be quite boring, then you see it in action, and then you go crazy again. So I guess it's like, it's not the trout of disillusionment. It's like the trout of craziness.
Yeah, look, I agree completely. And I've noticed a couple of comments in the chat here from Katie and Debbie as well. Totally agree. Perhaps it's the businesses are behind in technology adoption. We have, you know, LMSs have been around for 20 years. I've said quite a bit. I used to, my first implementation was back in '99 with a thing called WebCT that many people remember. You know, it doesn't exist anymore. Oh, well, Blackboard still exists. But anyway, leaving that aside, we won't talk about that. But you know, the platforms have been around forever, but they don't do what modern platforms do. So we often talk about a digital learning environment or a next generation environment as opposed to an LMS, because LMS is a very broad term.
And here's something that we have noticed being, you know, active in all these different market sectors, and that is, the market sector that adopts the technology the fastest and uses it in the most interesting, innovative ways is the business marketplace. It's not universities and it's not high schools. If anything, the high schools are the slowest in our experience. Like, so many high school teachers still view an LMS, even though it can have personalized adaptive learning and gamification, it's a grade book. You know, they still use it primarily as the grade book. Universities are a little bit more flexible, and they've started using gamification. Businesses are the ones that are actually the thirstiest for doing the cool stuff. Maybe that's because they have more freedom, or, you know, they're not so jaded. I don't know, but that's
well, I want to come back to that question in a minute, because I want to reinforce that view. But I read a stat last week that 40% of the cost of corporate training is travel. So if you think about the enormous spend that corporations make on educating their workforce, even whether it be a small business, in proportionate terms, it's still a huge cost for a small business, let alone a large business. To be thinking that you could cut 40% of the cost of supporting new skills development just simply by reducing travel, that's an amazing sort of concept. But yeah, I agree.
And let me quickly add something to that, because I used to be a corporate trainer. And so it's not only the sheer expense, because it's the travel time, the tickets, the hotel, waking up in the morning with the jet lag, whatever it is. But it's also that your trainers end up getting hugely burnt out. So we had about 50 to 100 trainers in this company, and it was a full-time job just dealing with trainer burnout, because these guys were just getting so tired. Like, I'm traveling so much, I don't see my kids, I'm like jet lagged all the time, I need to get back and develop courses. So if you can develop cool courses and deploy them in a scalable way, anytime, any place, on mobile devices, there's a bigger payoff than just the money savings.
Yeah, absolutely. And ultimately, the face-to-face experiences that we have in person are more valuable and can be, the normal flipped classroom approach, that you can be engaging more valuable activity. The other one that
you kick in the personalized web conferencing, like, you can have courses where people are taking the materials Monday through Thursday, and on Friday there's a personalized lesson and we're all chatting, and you got the one-on-one. So this kind of blended of self-paced plus some interactive video, I think, is the most kind of potent, effective use of technology.
Oh, look, I agree completely. And it's interesting. I'm just looking at these poll stats again. Our practitioners, we're saying that the time constraints are a bigger challenge than our own practitioner skills. And I tend to agree with that in some respects, but I still think that practitioners in all areas of the education sector, the current workforce, has a little way to go, just perhaps to lift our digital skills up a little bit more. We've got to be learning all the time. The other one that's interesting, that second question, our organisation already offers mobile digital micro-learning options. I've got 63% saying yes. So maybe that's because we've got the enlightened, we're preaching to the converted in this particular group, perhaps. But that is a great stat that I wouldn't have thought it would be 50-50. So that is fantastic. Now, just one further one before I let you go, because we are on time. But I've had another question just pop in here from Michael. Thanks for this, Michael. How do you see trends in content curation versus content creation developing in the coming years? So do you want to take... Yeah,
I'll tell you why I think there's going to be a trend here. So in the past, the content creation and the content creation were usually done by the same team. So you'd have your corporate development team, finding the best materials, sequencing them together, packaging them up, releasing them. But as time goes by, I think what you're going to see is more and more people contributing the content. That doesn't mean that they create it. They might find a great YouTube video and, as I mentioned, a browser plugin. Hey, I recommend this for internal consumption. So part one is more people feeding in stuff that they think is useful, which makes sense, because if you've got people in a big 50,000 user organization, you may as well leverage all of their ability to find good stuff. Then you're going to have those people also creating curated learning paths. So let's just say I'm a software engineer, I'm not part of corporate L&D, and maybe they're so busy and I want to put together a sequence of 10 videos for my own software engineering team. So what I should be able to do is to find all those individual pieces, some of which maybe I contributed, some of which were maybe by other people. Then I create a learning path, Graham Glass learning path for software engineering. I piece them together. Maybe I annotate them with a little voiceover or something. Then I pop that, and that's now a reusable resource that other people can use. So once again, I still think that the L&D, the corporate team is going to be doing a lot of it, but you are going to see more and more people not just simply find individual stuff, but then contributing sequenced learning paths.
I agree completely, and it reminds me of just that fundamental definition of digital literacy, being able to find, research, share, create content using information technologies. It's really a fundamental skill, and I think what you just touched on there as well, Graham, is that the area, do we create, do we curate? That argument of create, curate is sort of like everything else is melding. It's actually both. You're going to bring in the best authoritative sources from some locations, and you're going to create around it to end up with that course package, whether it's a 2-minute course package or a 2-day course package. I will pull it up here because we have gone a little bit over time. Graham, thank you so much for taking the time to talk through those trends today and spend time with our community here. I know I can see with the feedback that people have found it so valuable, not just the initial information, but also answering those couple of questions off the cuff. I really appreciate it. And again, congratulations on the achievements of CYPHER Learning. You guys are obviously doing a fantastic job. And I look forward to seeing some of those new features you gave us a little bit of an insight into.
Very busy right now. And I want to say thank you so much, Phill, also for inviting me. I'm very passionate about the subject. It's always nice to talk with someone who's equally passionate. And I'd like to thank everyone for listening in. I hope it was useful for you guys.
Yeah, I can see the appreciation coming through on the chat now. That's great. Thanks so much, everyone. So thanks, Graham. We'll let you guys go. And a quick shout out for us, Digital Learning Day. We do have 2 further sessions today, 2 down, 2 to go. So if you haven't yet registered for either of our upcoming sessions, just jump on and do that now. And we look forward to seeing you. Thanks again, Graham. We'll take care, and we'll no doubt touch base soon.
All right. Thanks a lot, Phill.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.